Hello, I'm Hutch and welcome to my video. So my last video was a trial at bookbinding, and in that video I was saying that I'd like to make a larger one, and this is the larger one I've made. It's much more of a proper sketchbook. I've put in the caddy paper, which is my favourite, and I've put in more stitches so it's a little bit more stable than the one I made in the other video, but otherwise it's a really nice little sketchbook. I still made some mistakes, as you can see here. I made these holes a little bit too close to the edge, so I reinforced them. But overall, it's a really nice sketchbook. I really like the quality of the paper, and I'm excited to be filling my first page in it. So that's what this video today is going to be. So I looked on Pinterest for some inspiration of things to draw, and I really like drawing fish. So I went for these largemouth bass, and I just got some inspo picks up, and I'm just doing a sketch here with my usual mechanical pencil. This spread is an aim at practicing drawing some fish, but also drawing some kind of underwater scenery, which I'll get to later. But one of the things I really want to do in this sketchbook is to be able to experiment a lot more. After looking through some of the work I've done recently, I've been doing, say, one subject like this fish here, and then that's kind of the end of the drawing. I haven't added any kind of scenery or any surrounding foliage or plants, or I've been putting in some little florals, but I haven't been creating a final piece. I've just been doing that one kind of sketch of an animal, and I also don't develop my sketches of those animals further. Instead, I just do one drawing of one animal and then I kind of call that done. And what I'd like to do with this sketchbook is, first of all, not just do one drawing of an animal, do multiple drawings of the same animal with different types of movement, different shapes, different poses and positions, and develop my drawing skills and my painting skills that way. I just want to also have some fun with some mark making and some more experimental kind of pieces where there's no pressure for it to be perfect, but just kind of have a bit more fun, see what I can do. And as I build up different elements that I like the look of and I enjoy painting, I can put those elements all together and create larger final pieces with more detail and more things to look at. So here I've just kind of started an initial wash, and one of the things that I've always struggled with sketchbooks before, especially with inks, is that I like to let the ink dry between washes, and I don't always really like using a hairdryer. So I've started on this fish, and then in the time that I'm waiting for it to wash, I've just started on a second largemouth bass. This time I want to do the same fish, but from a different kind of movement, a different angle. So this is what I'm trying to achieve here. This means as the first fish is drying, I can get on with the second fish, and then when the second fish dries, I'll get on with the first. If you watch my How I Paint with Ink vlog, then this kind of process I'm going through with you will be really familiar. I've just finished doing the initial washes with the watered down Frisk drawing ink, and then now I've just switched over to a fine liner brush and I'm going in and adding in the kind of details and building up different areas. Again, I'm not using terribly opaque ink. It goes on a lot darker than what it actually dries, so you'll see here that ink there looks like it's almost black, but as it dries it will thin down a lot and it will look a lot less opaque. It's one of the reasons I really enjoy working with ink, is because I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I can fall into the trap of trying to make every mark perfect and make all of the pieces kind of blend really well together, when actually with ink you can't. Every time you put your paintbrush down and as you work with the ink it gets more and more translucent, so you can't be perfect with it, and it makes it quite a tricky medium to work with if you are a perfectionist. but I really like the way that it comes out because it brings that imperfection into the pieces, which is something that I really enjoy about it. You kind of also have to have faith here, so you can see I've put at the top of this bast those darker patches, but they will dry down lighter, but you just kind of have to have that patience that and trust that you know that it will dry lighter than you put it on. And that can be really tricky, and also you have to have the patience to let it dry to see. You can speed it up by using a hairdryer. This is something I've been doing more and more recently, especially working in a sketchbook. So when I was working on a single sheet of paper, I'd just put that single sheet aside and I'd start working on something else, a bit like what I've done here, where I work on one fish and then I've gone back to the second fish and then I'll go back to the first fish. But because I'm in a sketchbook and I want to work on the next page, I can't flip between them because otherwise I'll end up spreading ink everywhere. So I've been using a hairdryer to help speed up the drying process, and I'm not too sure what I think about it. It works really well. It dries the ink. It doesn't seem to affect how the ink dries. I think with watercolour and certain watercolour papers you have to be a little bit careful, because if you put on really wet ink or watercolour, then you can end up blowing the watercolour around or the ink around. But with this paper, it's part of what I really like about this paper, is the ink seeps into it really quickly, so I don't have to worry about blowing around the ink. But on this piece I just worked on lots of little bits and then I would come back. So at this point I was getting happier and happier with the bass, but I kind of needed to let all the little different areas I was working on dry. So I started up masking off some pieces on the other page. I'm just using low tack masking tape here, but I stick it on my skin and then unpeel it and stick it again and unpeel it, just to make it even less tacky so it doesn't tear up the page and it doesn't rip into the ink, but it still kind of forms that protection. Something I have done is I have just dated when this first piece was done. You will see it's back in March. I do film these videos. Well, it's not the filming, it's the editing takes me quite a long time to do, and also because I'm only doing one video a week, I've edited this one and then it's been about a week since I've edited it, and then I will be uploading it. The plan with this side of the page is that I'll be working on some kind of underwater foliage and underwater kind of plant life. I'm just starting with the usual kind of wash. I wanted this to be quite dark. I did some pieces of work with fish where the whole background was black and then the fish were lighter coloured, and that was really great, apart from when you put on this drawing ink that I'm using, really opaquely thick, it's kind of shiny, and I didn't like how different bits of it were different kind of levels of shine. I think if I'd put like a matte top coat or a matte kind of sealant, then it would have looked really good. For now, for this one, I'm just using kind of a lighter wash background and then building up darker layers. See here, after I finish the wash, I'm going back in with some really opaque black. One of the problems with working in a sketchbook, when I'm using wet ink, I try and work from the top left corner down and across to the right. And you can see just a minute ago I got some ink from the page on the right on my hand, and that makes it quite tricky to work in versus just sheets of paper, because I still have to kind of move my hand across where I've got that wash drying on the right, and I'm having to hold my hand up quite a bit, which is a little bit trickier. This is where I probably should have used the hairdryer to dry the page on the right rather than kind of struggling through and painting with my hand kind of held it. Like, I quite like to lean my hand down as I'm painting. It gives me more control over the brush. I really like what I do here, where I've put down quite a wet layer of dark ink, and then I've just got my brush with a lot of water in it, and I'm just pulling that ink up, and it creates a really nice gradient and a really nice kind of shading of the colouring, which is something that I haven't had that much practice doing, but I really like the way that it looks. I really like the look of the opaque black on the kind of washes. It's one of my favourite kind of things with this ink to do, is they're all the same colour but there's different levels of it. And then I'm now moving over to the more kind of experimental side. So this top one, I'm hoping to do kind of like lily pads from underneath. I've obviously never seen lily pads from underneath. I don't know, like if you went wild swimming, would you be able to see them? I don't know. But I'm just working off a few reference photos and I'm just trying to build up kind of like how I'd imagine it would look like from beneath. And I think that's something which I want to kind of build up more in my own art, is like I won't have seen a fish like this in real life, but I can build up the idea of the image or the movement. Because if I did see a fish like in a river or something, you don't focus on it perfectly, you focus on little bits of it and you just build up that image. So that's what I'm kind of trying to build up here with these kind of foliages. I'm trying to create a bit of movement by not just having straight lines, and I'm trying to build up different layers and depth of perspective. So where I have the lighter stalks in the background and then the darker parts are in the foreground, I'm working on that. I really like the kind of splodgy dots on the bottom one. The different levels of darkness add a really great kind of tone. And then going into this middle one, because I don't want the bottom two to be too similar, I'm trying out doing these little stalks with little leaves coming off them, which isn't something I tried in the bottom one. I kind of kept the little leaves to those splodgier areas, and I'm just slowly building up and adding in those little details. So the plan with these kind of elements is that I'll hopefully combine the foliage and scenery on the right with the drawings of the fish on the left to create a final piece at some point. And I'll kind of pick the foliage based on what I like out of these experiments I've done. I'm quite happy with how the bass are looking at the moment. I'm quite confident in drawing the animals, the fish, the birds, but I'm not confident at drawing the kind of the other things in the piece. So that's kind of the goals I want to take from these experiments today. Another one of my intentions for this sketchbook is to develop my process of creating lino prints. At the moment, I tend to look up some reference photos, do one drawing, refine the drawing a little bit, and then immediately take it to lino, carve it out. And I don't think that really works. I haven't been very happy with the way some of my lino prints have come out recently. And what I want to do instead is to practice drawing a subject and other elements which could form part of the lino design, and then refine that multiple times with different drawings, try out different levels of detail, because I think one of the things I've been going wrong is that I'll do one drawing, try and transfer that to lino, and then I find out that in some places it's too detailed, while in other places it could have more detail. I think the saying is measure twice and cut once, and I kind of want to apply that process to what I've been doing with lino. I think what I have been doing with lino is quite good, that I've just been learning how to print and just the basics of inking up I've improved massively with. However, I still have a long way to go with developing how I actually design and how I transfer from an idea to a final piece of lino. So just going back to the piece that I'm actually working on here, so I kind of made a mistake. You can't really tell from the footage, but I painted a bit and then it was still wet when I came in with these washes, which meant that I couldn't drag them up with wet. So then instead I did that first wash, let it dry, and then put a second lighter wash, and I've got that really harsh line you can see between the shading, where I really should have, if I hadn't have had the wet detailing and I could have done the shading all at once, I wouldn't have had that harsh line. However, I do really like the kind of gradient that it does create. It would have been nicer if it was a little bit of a smoother gradient. You can see I'm trying quite hard here to smooth that gradient out, but that's okay. That's kind of the part of it being a sketchbook, is that it isn't a final piece, it isn't a finished piece. And even if it was a finished piece, if it doesn't turn out okay, just start again, try again. You know, don't be too harsh on yourself. It is frustrating when you get like 99% of the way and then you make a mistake. And sometimes the best things to do with that is to come back later and give yourself some time away from the piece, because sometimes in your mind it may not have gone how you wanted it to go. However, when you come and look at it later, you're actually like, it's not a big deal. It actually adds something different I hadn't planned to the piece. So definitely don't worry too much about making mistakes, especially in a sketchbook. If you're not happy with something, you don't have to share it with the world. Just here, I'm coming in with some light colours to kind of finish off some of the areas where I think they needed a little bit more detail, and I'm really starting to like these kind of underwater scenes on the right. There's something that I haven't really done before. And now for the masking tape peel. This always reminds me of Simply Nailogical, where she peels off her nail polish and she calls it like peel porn. I'm not too sure what the brand of this masking tape is that I'm using, but just look for a low tack one, and they tend to be the best for not kind of ripping up your paper. I find it so satisfying when you take off the masking tape and then you get those really clean lines. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of chatty paint with me, and I look forward to sharing more of the pieces of work that I create in this sketchbook. So thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you next time.